Welcome to the INDS 490 Capstone Project Planning Workshop. I'm Stephen McAlpin, and I'm assuming at this point you've heard the discussion with Davis Capabianca about his capstone project and how he got back on track. And one of the things he did was to move from more of a linear programming style, which is what a Gantt chart is used for, to what we call agile development or the Scrum method. And my goal here is to compare those two approaches and to give you some specific examples and techniques for getting back on track or really coming up with a plan right now that works best for you this week in this moment. So the Gantt chart is a great tool for projects where there's a high degree of certainty. You've built the house before, you've put up the skyscraper, you're a car company and you know exactly what parts need to be available when and who puts them on. So Gantt charts are a visual view of tasks, as you can see here on the slide, and very much expose dependency relationships. That means I need to do task A before I can start task B. And you can see here a typical Gantt chart where an engineer, let's say, investigates the needs of the customer, develops specifications, reviews those specifications with the user, revises the specs, gets a signature, and then starts developing the product. Not a lot of overlap until you get to testing. You've developed a prototype, you test it, and there's some iteration and back and forth there. But this is very much a linear view. But what happens when things go wrong and things don't appear or permissions don't appear, the interviewee isn't available, the feedback doesn't come in from the faculty mentor? The thing you want to avoid is having to wait in these dependency relationships. I can't move forward because I don't have approval. And you have to ask yourself, which pieces can you move ahead in your schedule? You were going to do it later, but now you can do it today, and which need to be pushed back. Think of them more as flexible blocks, components of your project. So don't wait, but ask yourself what you're most excited to work on. Sometimes, and this happened with Davis, sometimes there's a piece that you know well and you can get working on it. Let's say writing a story, a personal journal entry, doing some kind of review that you're ready to do. But by all means, whatever you do when the timeline goes wrong, notify your stakeholders. Let your mentors know. Let the INDS staff know. Have conversations about how to get back on track. So moving from a Gantt chart linear approach, you can see immediately in this visual, this is Scrum, which is the nickname for agile development. And a Scrum is a group of rugby players. So it's very much meant to be a fluid, constantly changing team approach, right? So that's why number one is team. You've organized a team. You have design goals, which you created. You designed your capstone in 480. And you have a Scrum board is a list of tasks, a matrix you can see there in number 3. And you look at those Post-it notes or whatever you've made the Scrum board, and often it can be a worksheet, like an Excel spreadsheet. And you do what's called product backlog grooming. You're going through that backlog. Wow, I have all these tasks to do, and prioritizing. So that's number 4. And you discuss that. That's something to review again now with your team. How can I best manage my backlog of things I need to do? Literature review, interviews, data analyses, SOI. And you come up with, as you move into steps 5 through 8, that's your sprint planning meeting is your stakeholder meeting. And you start working through those tasks. This cycle, as you can see in the center, they suggest anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. I really like a 2-week cycle. 1 week doesn't seem long enough to get a sense of how well this step is going. 2 weeks seems about right. So when you're looking at this semester, to come up with 4 or even 5 sprints, 8 to 10 weeks, 2 weeks each, it gives urgency and organization to your capstone. So a lot of this is feedback loops, a sprint planning meeting. Here's what I'm going to do in the next 2 weeks, and I'll show you some examples. And then a stand-up meeting, which teams have as often as every day in product development, I'll show you questions you might ask. What are the stories, user stories that we have going? And an example of that, a user story that Davis shared with me when we were redoing his timeline, was how did the Navy respond to the Indonesian tsunami? Really was kind of a center point of his capstone presentation, if you've seen that. That's an example of a user story or a key story in the capstone. He was so clear about that, and that story was so well told, that we decided to make that the first sprint of his capstone spring semester. So user stories, reassessing priority of those stories, and estimates. So how long will it take me to investigate that or create a deliverable? Right. So you're estimating that time, but it's going to change. And that's why you have, I'll go back to it. That's why you have these feedback loops. You have what's called a design cycle. You have products or deliverables you're creating. And Professor Sauter and Freeland have shared some of those are non-negotiable dates that you have to include in your design cycle, where you have to turn in drafts, SOI drafts, so on and so forth. And you're updating your Scrum board. That's that upper right piece, and that's most likely your spreadsheet, or if you prefer a whiteboard, do that. And then by step 12, you're reviewing how your progress is going. That's the point of this workshop today, is to review how have you done well so far on the timeline you created in 480. And doing a retrospective. Am I on my timeline? How far off am I? And what can I do to adjust? Which brings you back in that circle from step 13 back to step 4, where you groom or manage your backlog of tasks. You're looking overall at your overall timeline and saying, okay, do I need to move pieces around? So that's the overall sprint cycle. Let's get to some examples. So what I have here is, and I prefer at least first draft to meet with a team, especially in the INDS classroom, which has a lot of whiteboard space, and sketch out a timeline. I put the dates, the weekly dates across the top of the whiteboard. This is kinetic sculpture race timeline. Let's say we're at Feb 17th last spring, 2022, and we wanted to prepare 2 vehicles, kind of ambitious. We wanted to prepare 2 kinetic sculpture vehicles for the race in early May. You can't see that because I wanted to zoom in so you could see what we actually wrote. But look at all these product backlog tasks we are trying to prioritize. So what do we need to do first on Feb 17th? Do a materials inventory. What do we have? What do we need? Review the concepts. That second bullet point says review the concepts for the sculptures. What's the concept we're going for with the Kraken upcycle, which needed a makeover because the theme changes every year for every race? And what's the visual concept of the shark, which went from MC Hammerhead to Robo Shark? We changed the look of it to be more of a steampunk vibe. And we reminded ourselves we're 11 weeks out from the race. At best, we have 5 2-week sprints. So we're chunking this out. And S1 in brown, you can see, okay, here's what we're going to do for the first sprint. We're going to do some testing, some attachments, make sure all of the pieces fit together. That's proto attach is my handwriting there. We'll be working in the courthouse garage. So where are we going to work? We have a space up there at the old courthouse, 900 Walker. We need to do sketches. We need to test the kind of paints we're going to use. We're going to add these flexible plates to the shark. We need to repair things like the wheels. At the bottom of that column on Feb 24th, you see SM Engineering. That's Stephen McAlpin. So that I'd be leading a separate engineering team to improve any of the mechanical work or machinery of the thing, and that's ongoing. And then that sprint ends March 3rd. On March 3rd, I felt like the engineering was behind and it wasn't safe. So it was great to have those checks and so I could adjust. You notice on March 10th, in the middle of Sprint 2, Taya is working on preparing the plates that are added on to the sculpture and testing, actually doing some painting. Deciding on costumes. This race is like performance art, so that had to be included and discussed in Sprint 2. And then actually attaching pieces on March 17th, and you see Sprint 3. SB is spring break. It's very important to note other obligations. Maybe you have a family trip planned during spring break. How much work realistically are you going to get done in every phase of the semester? One very important question that proved to be critical in Sprint 3 was that we had to ask ourselves, is the Kraken okay? There was an engineering team working on it, and is it mechanically ready to go? And we decided that if the engineering team hadn't finished repairs to the Kraken upcycle, our second vehicle, that we would pull the plug, right? We wouldn't wait for it to be done and then threaten to not have any sculptures ready for the race. And that's what we did. The engineering team needed more time to fix the Kraken drivetrain. And we said, okay, we're not racing the Kraken. We'll just focus on the Shark. How important is that to your capstone? How important was that to Davis's project planning? Absolutely critical. When you're behind or when something goes wrong, you need to discuss with your mentors, can I get all these pieces done? Do we need all these pieces to do a successful, feasible capstone? So that was one thing we did indeed jettison in Sprint 3, and we were very intentional about, like it or not, what has to be sacrificed to be successful overall. This is another look. You may have seen this already during Davis's interview, but this is a look at how he began his spring semester 2021. And this is more of a matrix. Yes, it's a linear piece, but what we superimposed on this was a sprint to get a really important user story done. And that is, you can see in gray, if you go across from Feb 14th, the check-in meeting with stakeholders, more or less beginning of the semester, across to item 1, written analysis of Indonesian tsunami response from within the military organizational perspective using waves of hope. It says create outline of waves of hope military communication. Davis, when we met at the beginning of the semester, I suggested to him that he just simply sprint rather than create an outline and, let's say, share that with stakeholders. Just tell the story. He's read the book. He tells the story well. Start writing. That can be a critical difference in capstone. You've been capstone planning. Now it's time to create content. Create a 3-page draft, a 5-page draft. Share it with faculty and mentors. Get that production and review loop that you saw earlier in the Agile Sprint. Get those loops going of it's just a prototype, it's just a draft, but get something written. Rather than waiting for approval each stage, it's you're producing content, you're getting feedback, you're revising. Students who get into that loop every week or two are able to produce a lot of content and feel that confidence that they're moving forward. That decision to prioritize that waves of hope analysis really kept the momentum going for Davis throughout the semester. And as you hopefully saw, he did a great capstone presentation and paper. Ask yourself, what's the core? What am I most excited to do, to write about, and keep that front and center and get feedback on it. Other questions you can be asking yourself is, what did I do yesterday to help finish this sprint? When you're in the middle of a 2-week sprint, okay, what was I able to do? What do I need to do today? And how can I clear or address the obstacles that are blocking me from moving forward? And again, reach out to your team. The team can often help you to remove or get around those obstacles. The resources, and this is just a short overview. There are links in the actual presentation, which I will share with your professors. What is Scrum? The Scrum website. If you want to look more in depth at how to manage those stages, the book that really inspired me was by a retired mechanical engineer, David Ullman, who wrote a short book, 70 pages, called Scrum for Hardware Design, with a couple of case studies of how teams successfully redesigned or designed projects. One was a robotic arm and one was a jet fighter, very successful teams. And to ask yourself, just to finish up, what each of you will work on with me, preferably in the classroom at the whiteboard, is how could you translate your 490 project tasks into a series of sprints this semester? What are your non-negotiable due dates? And how could you think more flexibly and iteratively about what you need to do in order to incorporate feedback and account for any glitches along the way? So we've seen a couple of examples. I look forward to working with each of you to come up with a great and feasible plan for the semester. Thanks a lot. See you soon.